When my son raised his voice at the dinner table and said, "At least mom's new husband is not a failure, like you," I felt something inside me collapse. It was not just the words, it was the way they echoed around the room, bouncing off the silence and pressing down on my chest like a weight. I could not move. It was humiliation, it was pain, it was betrayal from the very person I once carried in my arms as a baby. And in that moment, I stayed quiet. I froze, but not because I had nothing to say, but because I already held something a secret that no one at that table could imagine, a truth waiting to be revealed. That night would change everything. You are about to hear the story of how a father labeled a failure found the strength to face the lies and the betrayal around him, and how silence can sometimes be more powerful than anger. Before we dive into it, I want to ask for your help. We are reaching for a goal of subscribers on this channel, and every single one of you makes a difference. If you enjoy real, emotional stories that reveal the truth about family, about sacrifice, about betrayal, then subscribe now and join me in this journey. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Now, let me take you back to that dinner table, to the moment my son spoke those words that cut deeper than any knife, because that moment is not just where the pain began, it is also where the truth slowly started to rise to the surface, and nothing after that would ever be the same. The room was filled with the sound of plates and silverware when suddenly my son lifted his head, and his voice cut through the noise like a blade. "At least mom's new husband is not a failure, like you." Those words landed in the middle of the table like a bomb. I felt the air freeze around me. I could see my daughter's eyes widen in shock. Her fork stopped halfway to her mouth. My ex-wife looked down at her plate, pretending she did not hear anything, and the man sitting next to her, the new husband, leaned back in his chair with a smirk on his face. He did not say a word, but his eyes said everything. He was satisfied with what had just been spoken. I wanted to shout. I wanted to tell my son the truth. I wanted to remind everyone of the sacrifices I had made, the nights I stayed awake working to keep the lights on, the years I spent carrying this family on my shoulders. But my throat locked, my chest tightened. I could not speak, not yet, not in that moment, because I knew something no one else knew. While they sat there judging me, while my son called me a failure, I had an envelope hidden away. It was thin, ordinary, nothing special to look at, but inside that envelope was a truth so sharp it could cut through every lie that had been told about me. So I stayed silent. My son looked at me, expecting me to argue, to defend myself, but I just looked back at him and let the silence hang heavy over the table. The silence made him frown. It made my ex shift uncomfortably in her seat. It made the new husband lose a bit of that smugness, because silence can be terrifying when you do not know what it hides. In that silence, my mind went back to everything that had led me there, the endless hours at work, the distance that grew between me and my wife, the small remarks that turned into accusations, the coldness that slowly took over our home. I thought of the day I realized she had found someone else, and how quickly the story was twisted to make me the villain, to make me the failure, and now even my own son believed it. And that was the wound that hurt the most. I sat at that table bleeding on the inside, but I knew this was not the end. This was only the surface of a deeper truth, because that envelope was more than paper. It was more than ink. It was proof. It was justice. It was my voice when I had none. And soon, very soon, that silence would speak louder than any words I could ever shout. After that dinner table moment, I could not stop hearing those words, failure. They repeated in my head again and again, like an echo that refused to fade. It was not the first time I had felt their sting. My ex-wife had used that word on me more times than I could count, and somehow she made sure my children heard it too. To them, I was not the man who paid the bills, who stayed awake when they were sick, who worked long hours so they could have a better life. No, I was the man who was never around, the man who did not laugh enough, did not smile enough, did not buy enough, the man who is not good enough. It is strange how people only see what is missing instead of what has been given. They never saw the nights when I drove home half asleep from exhaustion. They never saw the sacrifices I made to keep them safe and fed. I thought love and responsibility would speak for themselves, but I learned the hard way that silence can be twisted into guilt. I still remember the first time my ex looked me in the eyes and called me a failure. It was not even during a fight. It was just an ordinary evening. I came home late from work with food for everyone, and instead of thanks, she said, "If you were a real husband, you would be here, not running around trying to fix your broken dreams." The words hit harder than I expected, but I brushed them off, telling myself she was just tired. But it did not stop there. Soon, every argument ended with that word, failure, and soon, even the moments without arguments carried the same tone. The sighs, the rolling eyes, the dismissive gestures, it was like she had already decided what I was in her mind. And once someone decides you are worthless, every action becomes proof of that story. If I worked late, it meant I cared more about work than family. If I stayed home, it meant I was lazy. If I bought something nice, it meant I was reckless with money. If I saved, it meant I was cheap. No matter what I did, the ending was always the same: you are a failure. And slowly, I began to believe it. I started Doubting myself, doubting if I was really a good father, a good man, a good anything. The kids saw it too. My daughter stayed quiet. She never said much. But my son, he started repeating things that sounded like her voice, not mine. He was too young to understand, but children listen more than we think they do. They absorb the tone, the bitterness, the accusations. And one day they start speaking it out loud like it is their own truth. I cannot blame him for that. He was just a boy hearing his mother's story and thinking it was the only story. But for me, it was like losing him piece by piece. Every time he looked at me with disappointment, I felt like I was vanishing, like the years I spent raising him were erased by a single lie told enough times to feel real. And my ex, she was careful. She never yelled in front of strangers, never embarrassed herself in public. She saved her words for me for the moments when I was alone, when the walls of our house became a cage. She would lower her voice and say, "You will never be enough for anyone." And if I argued, if I tried to defend myself, she would laugh a cold laugh and remind me that no one would ever believe me over her. She was right too, because when we finally separated, she wore the mask of the victim so well. Everyone thought she was the strong one, the new husband, the perfect replacement. And me, I was the man who failed. That was the story told and retold until it felt carved into stone. But what no one knew, not her, not him, not even my children, was that the truth had a way of leaving shadows, and sometimes those shadows hide things you never expect. One afternoon, when the weight of everything felt heavier than usual, I received something unexpected. An old colleague from my past, someone I had not spoken to in years, handed me an envelope. It was plain brown, ordinary, nothing remarkable, but the way he looked at me before giving it made me pause. He said, "Keep this, you might need it one day." Then he walked away without explanation. At first, I almost ignored it. What could a simple envelope change in my life that was already broken? But something inside me told me to open it. And when I did, I froze. Inside were papers, documents, copies of records, all pointing to one thing. The man my ex-wife now called her husband, the man who sat at the head of dinners smiling smugly, was not the man he pretended to be. The records showed debts, unpaid businesses, ruined lies covered in charm and half-truths. I could see signatures, dates, names. I could see a trail of deception stretching back years. He was not a savior. He was not successful. He was a fraud, and my ex had fallen for him completely. Or maybe she knew, maybe she chose not to care, because as long as he made me look smaller, weaker, she was satisfied. Holding that envelope in my hands, I felt something stir inside me, something I thought was gone for good, a sense of power, not revenge, but truth, the kind of truth that could cut through the lies that wrapped around my children like chains. I hid the envelope away, not telling anyone, not even my daughter. I waited. I carried it with me through silent dinners and cold weekends. I watched as my son praised him, as my ex looked at me with disdain. And every time I wanted to break down, I reminded myself of what I held, the truth resting in silence, waiting to be spoken. Sometimes at night, I would lie awake staring at the ceiling and ask myself, should I use it? Should I expose him? Or would it just make things worse for my kids? Would it make them hate me more? The envelope became a weight and a shield, both at once heavy but protective. It gave me patience. It gave me a reason to stay silent during the humiliations I endured, because silence backed by truth is not weakness, it is timing, and timing was everything. I knew the right moment would come, and when it did, that envelope would speak louder than I ever could. Before the envelope, before the word failure echoed in my son's voice, there was a time when I believed in family, a time when I thought love and sacrifice were enough. I remember the early years of my marriage when my wife and I were just starting out. We had nothing but dreams and determination. I worked long hours, sometimes 2 jobs at once, just to keep us afloat. And when our first child was born, I promised myself I would give him everything I never had. I wanted to be the kind of father who built a safe home, the kind of man who carried the weight without complaint. But life has a way of testing promises slowly, quietly, until you realize the ground under your feet is no longer steady. At first, it was little things. I would come home exhausted, hoping for a smile or a thank you, and instead I was met with sighs and questions. Why are you always working? Why are you never here? I tried to explain. I told her I was doing it for us, for the kids, for the future, but every explanation sounded hollow in her ears. No matter how much money I brought in, it was never enough. No matter how hard I worked, it was always too little, too late. She wanted more time, more attention, more affection, and I wanted to give it, but I had nothing left. When I walked through that door, I gave what I had, but what I had was never what she wanted. Over time, the small complaints grew sharper. When I forgot to take out the trash, I was irresponsible. When I missed a school event because of overtime, I was selfish. When I bought her a gift, she called it wasteful. When I saved money, she called it stingy. Every road led to the same conclusion: you are failing us, you are failing me, you are failing them. And the word failure became a shadow in our home. It followed me from room to room. It whispered at night. It clung to me even when I held my children in my arms. Then came the distance. I noticed her phone calls in the other room, her laughter when she thought I was asleep, the way she dressed differently when she said she was going out. With friends, I wanted to believe it was nothing I wanted to believe. She was just restless. I convinced myself that every marriage had rough seasons, that if I worked harder, she would see that I was worth standing beside. But deep down, I felt it, the coldness, the absence, the walls rising between us, until the night I knew for certain. I came home earlier than usual, and she was not alone. I did not shout. I did not break anything. I just stood there, and in her eyes, I saw no regret, only defiance, as if she had been waiting for me to find out, as if my pain confirmed the story. She had already written the story, where I was the failed husband, the inadequate father, the man who deserved to be replaced. After that night, the argument stopped because there was nothing left to argue about. She had made her choice. And when she finally asked for a divorce, she wore the mask of the victim so perfectly people pitied her. She told our friends I was too busy, too distant, too cold. And she told our children that mommy had to find someone who would not disappoint them. I watched as my son nodded, as if he understood. I watched as my daughter lowered her eyes, refusing to speak, and I felt myself disappearing from their hearts. It was not enough that I lost my marriage. I was losing my children too. And every time I tried to explain, every time I tried to say the truth, it sounded bitter, it sounded like excuses. And the more I tried, the more I looked like the villain in the story she crafted. It was in those days when the silence became my only refuge. I could not win with words, not then, not against her charm, not against her tears, not against the way she twisted everything into another piece of evidence of my failure. So I waited. I carried my pain quietly, and every moment I told myself, one day the truth will matter, one day the truth will find its way through this darkness, and when that day came, I would be ready. After the divorce, life turned into a battlefield, not with shouts or broken dishes, but with something far more quiet and cruel indifference. I would pick up my children for weekends, and from the moment they stepped into my car, I could feel the distance. My daughter sat silently staring out the window. My son crossed his arms and asked questions I knew were not his own. Why did you not fight harder for Mom? Why could you not keep the family together? Why could you not be better? Each question was like a dagger, not because he meant to hurt me, but because I knew whose voice echoed through his words. It was her voice, his mother, planting seeds of doubt and watering them with every conversation she had with him. I tried to explain, I tried to tell him that love is not always enough, that sometimes the person you give everything to chooses someone else no matter what you do. But explanations mean nothing to a child who sees the world in black and white. To him, I was simply the man who lost the family, and losing meant failing. I began to dread the weekends, not because I did not love my children, but because I felt like I was on trial every time I saw them, every action judged, every silence misinterpreted. Once, when I took them to dinner, my son looked at me and said, "Mom's new husband is teaching me how to play basketball." He said it with pride, with excitement. Then he looked at me with disappointment and added, "You never had time to teach me, did you?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him about the nights I worked double shifts so he could go to school, about the hours I spent fixing things in the house instead of resting. I wanted to tell him that my hands were too tired to dribble a ball because they were too busy carrying the weight of his world. But none of that mattered to him, because in his eyes love was measured in moments, not sacrifices, and I had none to show him. My ex knew exactly what she was doing. She never raised her voice against me in front of them. She only raised doubts. She would smile sweetly and say, "Your father means well, but he just cannot give you what you need." And with those soft, poisonous words, she erased me. Little by little, I watched my son start to mirror the contempt in her eyes. When I made mistakes, he rolled his eyes. When I tried to connect, he pulled away. When I bought gifts, he compared them to what the new husband gave, and always mine seemed smaller, cheaper, less thoughtful. I could not compete because it was not about the gifts or the games. It was about the narrative she had built, and he was too young to see through it. I remember once I showed up to watch his school play. I left work early, rushed across town, and when he saw me in the crowd, he frowned instead of smiling. Later, he asked why I even came, if I never came before. Those words crushed me because they erased every time I had been there, every late night helping with homework, every early morning making breakfast. But memory is fragile when someone else rewrites it again and again. I felt like a ghost in my own children's lives, present but unseen, breathing but invisible. And all the while the new husband stood taller in their eyes. He was the one who laughed louder, who promised bigger, who filled the spaces I could not fill, or maybe the spaces I was never allowed to fill. I endured it. I kept quiet. I smiled. When my daughter avoided eye contact, I nodded. When my son compared me unfavorably, because in my heart, I knew something they did not know. The envelope I carried with me became my anchor. It reminded me that appearances are not truth. It reminded me that one day the lies would collapse under the weight of evidence. But until that day, every insult, every doubt, every cold stare cut me deeper and deeper. I wondered how much more I could take. I wondered how long before I disappeared completely in their hearts. Yet, even as I wondered, I held on, because silence backed by truth is not surrender. It is waiting for the right moment. The night of the family dinner was heavy with tension, the kind of tension that wraps around your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I knew the moment was coming, the moment when everything would finally shift. I had carried that envelope with me for months, waiting for the right time, waiting for the words that would break through the lies. And when my son shouted that insult across the table, when he compared me to the new husband and declared that at least Mom had chosen better than me, I felt the room spin, but instead of answering, I reached into my coat and placed the envelope on the table. Silence followed. My ex looked at me with that same smirk she had worn since the day she left, confident that I would never fight back, confident that I would always sit in the shadow of her new life. My son crossed his arms, daring me to speak, as if he already knew nothing I said would matter. But I did not speak. I let the envelope speak for me. Slowly, carefully, I slid it across the table toward them, my hand shaking not from fear but from the weight of years of silence. My son picked it up, frowning, curious despite himself. He tore it open and pulled out the papers. His eyes scanned the words, and confusion replaced the anger in his face. He looked at me, then back at the page. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Is this true?" My ex shifted uncomfortably, her face no longer smug but pale. She reached out, trying to snatch the papers, but it was too late. My daughter grabbed them from her brother and read aloud the truth that I had been carrying all along, the proof of betrayal, not mine but hers. It was the documentation of debts hidden in my name, bills she had created with a new husband long before the divorce, signed with my information forged behind my back. The truth that while I had worked myself to exhaustion, she had been building a new life, using me as the foundation. I had never spoken of it, never accused her, never dragged her name through the dirt, because I wanted to protect my children from the ugliness. But in that moment their contempt demanded the truth, and the truth was like a blade cutting through the web of lies. My son stared at her wide-eyed. "Mom, is this real?" he asked, his voice trembling, and for the first time she had no answer. She stuttered. She tried to twist it. She said those papers meant nothing, that I was manipulating them, but her words fell flat because the evidence was undeniable, and the silence in the room pressed against her until she could not breathe anymore. I did not raise my voice. I did not gloat. I simply looked at my children and said, "You deserve to know who has really been failing you. I never wanted to be the one to shatter your image of your mother, but you forced me to break my silence. The truth is here, and now you can decide who I really am." My son held the papers in his shaking hands, tears filling his eyes. He looked between me and her, and I saw the walls he had built against me begin to crack, the anger, the contempt, all of it shaken by the realization that he had been living in a story written by someone else. He whispered, "I did not know, Dad. I swear I did not know." And in that moment I felt years of pain release from my chest. My daughter hugged me quietly, her small voice saying, "I believe you, Dad. I believe you." And my ex sat frozen, caught in the trap she had woven herself, her power crumbling as the truth stood naked before us. I had not planned to reveal it that way, but sometimes the ugliest truths must be shown to save the love of your children. And so the envelope no longer weighed heavy in my pocket, because its burden had finally been lifted. My ex finally snapped, her voice rising sharp and desperate. She pointed at me across the table and screamed, "You think one envelope erases years of your failures? You think they will suddenly see you as a hero because you dug up some old papers? You are nothing, and you will always be nothing." The words echoed through the room, but they no longer cut me, because the truth had already been revealed, and the weight of her lies was crumbling around her. My son slammed his fist on the table, his face red with anger, but not at me, at her. He shouted, "Why did you lie, Mom? Why did you make us hate him when you were the one hiding things from us?" My daughter was crying, holding the papers against her chest like proof of a reality she wished was not true. And I sat still, calm. For the first time in years I looked at her, my ex, the woman who once promised to stand by me forever, and I said, "You built your world on my silence, but my silence ends tonight." She lunged forward, trying to tear the papers from our daughter's hands, but my son stood between them, his voice breaking. "Stop, Mom, just stop. We deserve the truth." She froze, shocked that he had chosen to shield me instead of her, and that was the moment I stood from my chair, slowly, deliberately, my hand steady. As I said, "You called me a failure. You made them believe I was weak. But tonight they see you for who you are, not through my words, but through your own actions, through the lies you built around us." The room vibrated with tension. Her new husband shifted, uncomfortably avoiding my gaze like a coward, unwilling to defend her, because deep down he knew the truth as well. He knew the weight of what they had done. My ex's face twisted with fury. She screamed at me, saying I ruined everything, that I would pay for exposing her. But the words fell into emptiness, because the power she once had was gone. My son turned to me, tears in his eyes, and whispered, "Dad, I am sorry for everything, for believing her, for treating you like you were nothing." I shook my head gently. and said, "No, son, you do not owe me an apology. You were a child listening to the only story you knew. The blame was never yours, it was mine for letting the silence last too long, for thinking that protecting you from the truth would save you. But now you are free from that story, and you can choose who to believe." His shoulders collapsed with relief, and he hugged me tightly for the first time in years, his arms clinging to me like he was afraid I would disappear. My daughter joined us, her small frame trembling as she said, "We just wanted a family, Dad." And I whispered back, "You still have one. As long as I breathe, you will have one." My ex stood there watching the pieces slip from her hands, powerless. And in that moment, I did not feel anger anymore, only pity, because she had destroyed her own reflection, and the children she thought would always be hers unconditionally had seen behind the mask. The climax was not about me screaming or fighting. It was about finally standing in the truth without fear. It was about letting the lies collapse under their own weight. And as the table stood in silence, except for the sound of my children crying in my arms, I knew this was the end of the war, not because I had won, but because the truth had spoken louder than any of us. After the confrontation, the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that is heavy with relief and disbelief. My children sat close to me, holding on, as if afraid the moment would vanish. They whispered questions and confessions I had waited years to hear. "Son, why did you never tell me you knew things were wrong?" he said, looking at me with wide eyes, and I smiled gently and said, "I did not want to overwhelm you. I wanted to protect you. And now you know the truth." My daughter shook her head softly, her tears staining her cheeks. She said, "Dad, I cannot believe she lied to us for so long." And I hugged her tightly, promising we would never hide the truth from each other again. My ex stood frozen at the edge of the room. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The new husband avoided eye contact, his confidence shattered by the undeniable proof that his carefully constructed image was built on lies. He muttered something about misunderstanding, but the words were empty. The children ignored him. My son turned to him and said, "You will not manipulate us anymore. We see who you really are." And that finality in their voices was something I had dreamed of for years. The days after were not easy, but they were healing. We spent hours talking about what had happened, piecing together the missing fragments of our family story. I answered every question my children had about the past, about their mother, about the choices that had been hidden from them, and I could see their understanding slowly rebuild their trust in me. Brick by brick, they laughed again. In small moments, they played games. They asked questions about life and dreams, and I answered, because the silence that had kept us apart was gone. We began creating memories not forced by appearances, but by honesty and connection. I watched my son show genuine curiosity about the world for the first time in months. I watched my daughter smile without hesitation when I entered the room, and I knew we were on the path to healing. Even my ex changed in subtle ways. She no longer tried to control our interactions. She seemed smaller, quieter, defeated in the best way. She had lost the power she had held over my children, and that loss was justice in itself. The new husband vanished from our lives eventually. He tried to maintain contact, but the children refused. His presence was no longer tolerated, and the relief in the house was palpable. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the weight of lies pressing down. I could walk through the door and feel that this home belonged to me and them, not to fear, not to manipulation. Every night when I put my children to bed, I whispered, "I am proud of you for holding on, for trusting the truth, for choosing the reality that is ours, not the one someone else tried to sell us." And in that quiet moment, I finally felt it, the closure, the peace that comes not from revenge, but from truth. And I knew that life would not be perfect, that wounds would take time to heal, but the foundation was now solid. The honesty had taken root, and with it the possibility of a future where my children could see me for who I truly am, not the failure they had been told to believe. I was the man who had stood through humiliation, through betrayal, through years of silence, and finally emerged stronger for them, stronger for myself, stronger for the family that was always meant to survive, no matter the obstacles, no matter the lies. Sitting with my children after everything that happened, I finally understood what silence and truth can do together. The years of pain, the nights of doubt, the moments of feeling invisible, all led me here to this fragile yet unbreakable peace. I looked at their faces and asked myself, how long had I carried the weight of other people's lies? How long had I allowed the world to define me instead of holding on to the person I knew I truly was? And I realized life will always test us with unfairness, with betrayal, with moments that make us question who we are and what we stand for. But it is in those moments that our choices define us. Will we speak? Will we stay silent? Will we fight with anger? Or will we fight with patience? Will we protect those we love? Or will we let them be swept away by stories that are not true? I hope that anyone listening knows that it is never too late to reclaim your voice, to show your children your truth, to stand in the face of lies and still remain human, still remain Loving still remain unbroken. I hope you see that failure is not defined by what others say or by the moments we fall, but by how we rise, how we choose to be present despite the past, despite the pain. And as I looked at my son and daughter smiling with a newfound understanding, I felt a quiet joy, a relief deeper than any words could convey. And I wonder how many of us walk through life carrying secrets that, if revealed, would free us from chains, invisible to the rest of the world, yet the courage to reveal them is what transforms fear into freedom. And I leave you with this question: what truths have you held in silence? What moments of courage are waiting for you to embrace them? And if you take anything from my story, let it be that patience and honesty, even when delayed, can rebuild what seemed lost forever. And that sometimes the greatest victories are not shouted in anger, but spoken in truth, in the quiet confidence of knowing who you really are. If this story moved you, if it made you feel the weight of silence and the power of truth, then please show your support by hitting the like button. It helps more than you know. And if you want to hear more real emotional stories that reveal secrets that show the struggles and victories of everyday life, then subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story. Your support keeps these stories alive and growing. And right now on the screen, you will see another video waiting for you, a story that dives into family betrayal and secrets that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Click on it and continue this journey with me. And remember, every like, every comment, every subscription is a way to be part of this story, a way to share in the victories and the revelations, and in the moments that remind us all that the truth matters more than appearances, and that love and patience can endure even the deepest betrayals. Thank you for watching and for trusting me to tell this story, and I cannot wait to see you in the next video.